Reefer rates along the southern border were interesting. They were up considerably last week on those backhaul lanes to the west coast. The Salinas guys were not interested in leaving California, happy to run the northeast, but not wanting to go to McAllen for fear of being grabbed by ice. Not interested.
I've had shippers tell me they've had asset-based carriers giving them lanes back because the drivers weren't going to leave the house.
Right.
They're scared to leave the house.
So I think at a lane level, you're definitely seeing that.
Yeah.
Oh, I think absolutely at a lane level, you are absolutely seeing some tightness. We're seeing that in our rates. Nationally, I'm not seeing it, right? Nationally, our rates are coming down this week. I think what's interesting is reefer. So I was talking about dry van were flat last week. Reefer rates actually went up a couple of pennies last week nationally. Reefer rates along the southern border were interesting. They were up considerably last week on those backhaul lanes to the west coast, which I was hearing out of Salinas. The Salinas guys were not interested in leaving California, happy to run the northeast, but not wanting to go to McAllen for fear of being grabbed by ice. Not interested.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of drivers that are here and overstayed work visas.
Yeah.
That maybe are qualified.
Yeah.
And can pass the English proficiency.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're really not. They're not the ones that maybe have been given a CDL improperly, but they've overstayed their work visa.
Could be. It's going to take time for them to qualify, right? So I think it's going to take a bit of time. So I think my sense is, A, I don't know how you qualify the 194,000. I don't know where that number comes from, right? B, it's going to take time for... So here's my take. I think we've already seen the impact already because this is like water always finds the path of least resistance.
Least resistance, yeah.
So I think what you're seeing is, so when I was in Salinas, drivers were saying, I'm happy to run the northeast. I ain't going to Florida or McAllen. Right? So they're already moving.
Well,
right?
But I think, McAllen, for example, is border crossing town.
Right.
Edinburgh, Far, McAllen.
Yep.
So, when you start to see the ICE officials in and out of the scales in Florida,
yep,
you're seeing that. So we saw Florida rates go up, but I think it's also because, like Texas, they're not. It's not crop time in Texas.
True.
So it's border crossing product from Mexico,
right?
Which is either going to come into Nogales, Arizona,
right,
or it's going to go over at McAllen, Edinburgh, Far area.
Yep.
So
it'll move around.
It will as the season.
Yeah.
So what's crazy is we're seeing overall on the refrigerated side, there's a squeeze now in a lot of areas that we haven't seen in years. Now, we aren't up against Thanksgiving yet.
Right.
That 2 weeks ahead of Thanksgiving is just brutal. What do you think the chances of, because I'm looking at the market and I'm going to say through Thanksgiving, it's going to be up.
Oh, I think for refrigerated, absolutely. I think it's going to be a really wild time for refrigerated between now and Christmas.
Yeah, and then
absolutely.
Maybe we'll see a lull in January, maybe.
Yeah.
But I think I think by second quarter, the refrigerated's probably going to step up more so over the next 12 months, where I think the van freight's going to be a slower reacting.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think van's going to be pretty subdued. But reefer regionally, I think the getting's going to be pretty good for refrigerated. I do think non-domicile CDL, English language proficiency, is going to have a really big impact on regional lanes because I think some of the minority cohorts own some of those lanes, particularly out of California. I think they're going to be hard hit. Not because they're in the illegal category. I just think they're going to stay home and we're going to see that road check effect. I think that some of those drivers are going to go to ground.
I think you're accurate there. I think we are still going to see attrition at the end of this year.
Which is a good thing because, hey, I've been watching, when I go out and take my truck out, go to truck shows, I'm appalled at some of the stuff that goes on. Like, I don't think there's anything that gets my skin up more than the driver that takes the 30-minute break in the fuel island, or some of the stuff. I mean, I've had a really big problem with drivers that don't have a CB radio for years. I just don't understand how drivers can be disconnected. But having watched what goes on for the last 10, 15 years, I'm starting to connect the dots now with this non-domicile CDL and the English language proficiency. I'm starting to connect the dots now with what's going on. And I actually think there is a lot more drivers that we're not talking about that are doing what I see go on here in Boston. And that's just people that are not insured and don't have a license at all, just driving around. Because in my wife's catering business, they've had a number of cars hit their vans that just take off. And you know they are not licensed and don't have any insurance. Now,
That's why they take off.
that's not a new phenomenon. I mean, when we started Safety Cam in Australia in 1997, which is the overhead gantries that measure your hours of service and speed and license validity when you drive under them, they got these cameras all over Australia that do everything. Which we should have a whole discussion about one day on another podcast. It's a fascinating system that would solve all of this carrier identity stuff that we've got going on here. They found in 1997, when they started running cars underneath these cameras, 5% of the entire national car fleet was unregistered, had never been registered. So I bet that there's a lot of trucks, and I know that I see them out there, have no DOT number, but it's a fake DOT number on the side because you see them with the handwritten numbers. I bet there's a lot of truckers out there that have no CDL, no license, no DOT, nothing, no insurance, whipping up and down the roads. I bet there's a bunch of them.
I don't know that you can make it long like that without an ELD and without all that stuff. I can tell you that driving incapacity has been pretty depressed.
Right.
And is I would say in worse shape than the refrigerated.
Right.
But I think attrition is going to help across the board because when there's plenty of reefer freight to go get, it impacts the van market some in areas where there's refrigerated freight because the reefers aren't fighting for the van freight at that moment.
I think this might affect the power only crowd too. Because I see that's where some of the MC selling with a truck deal's been going on. You know, the people selling MC numbers with a truck in the power only business has been going on. I think that there'll be some. There's been some shenanigans going on there also.
A lot.
Yeah.
I think there's been a great amount.
There needs to be some attrition. I think we're on the tail end of what went on in the pandemic. There was a lot of capacity come in. There was a lot of things overlooked. I think what might happen, I think this is where maybe what we're getting to with this, if the government really ups the ante in terms of making it harder for companies to get in, both brokers and carriers, right, to get into the industry.
We got too many brokers too.
Right. And then drivers, making it really much harder for drivers to get in and hold on to their qualifications. That's a good thing.
No, I think the barrier of entry needs to be the bar needs raised there from all sides.
So that's a good thing. So what you end up with in this next freight cycle is a much higher barrier to entry for everybody. And then that means capacity should be tighter, theoretically should be tighter. And then you're waiting for demand to pick up. And then I think we're in a much better position for the entire industry's in a much better position. As to what that means for rates, I don't know. But hopefully we go through this clean out phase where we don't have this madness that's been going on for a couple of years now, where you just see these drivers whipping through construction zones oblivious to road signs.
I watched a video with it this morning.
It's absolute insanity. And I downplayed it and said, yeah, like immigrant truck drivers don't have a mortgage on this sort of stupidity. It's been going on forever. And when you look at it, yeah, like it seems to skew more towards drivers that are newer in the industry. But we've also been recruiting drivers from minority cohorts for a couple of decades now. So by default, we've ended up with this problem. So as an industry, we've got to address it. But I think we focus on the drivers as the problem, whereas there's training schools and companies that have been hiring them. And I don't know, I think we're giving them a bit of a pass here.
Well, we've given a lot of the big carriers a pass on the non-domiciled CDLs because that's where that came from.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Right. So let's go back there for accountability.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even need to name. I don't. We're not going to sit here and pick on other people.
Right.
What I'm going to say is, if you look on the postings of all the truck accidents,
Right.
it's funny. It's the same carriers all the time.
Right. See that big one yesterday in the truck stop where there was a big carrier crashed into another big carrier, and I don't know if you saw that. There was
I didn't. I happened to see the 8 fatalities in Georgia on Monday afternoon. That was heartbreaking.
Like some of the stuff. I don't know how this stuff happens, but
Heartbreaking.
like, and these weren't necessarily immigrant truckers. Like this wasn't about non-domicile CDLs. These were large carriers having accidents, and I just think there's like a lot of craziness that goes on out there that I think what I'm getting at is we're at a tipping point in this industry where a lot of things have to change, but I feel like we're at a tipping point in society in general. Like I really feel like we're at a tipping point because, as an immigrant in this country, it's a very different country than when I moved to in 2000.
Okay,
Really different.
So now, I would say in the 60s, because I have friends that are immigrants.
Yeah.
In the 60s, their parents came through.
Mm.
And they went to citizenship classes and learned about the American dream and all the things that were prevalent here.
Right.
And that's not a thing anymore.
Right. Right.
Right? People used to have turkey every Thanksgiving.
Right. Right.
Not something that people don't. The traditions,
Right.
From even a holiday perspective, aren't there? Much less a lifestyle perspective. But like to your point, I think it gets so far away from reality, and then it's a swing back.
We are, and it's the same in my home country in Australia. We moved. So you got to remember that.
Have we gone far enough to where we get to swing back? Is what I'm looking for you to tell me.
Well, we are. I think we went a long way to the right. We went way too far to the left. At some point, we've got to come back to a place where everybody can meet and have a discussion. We see the same in Australia. And I think my wife said something really interesting. She said 9/11 happened and we had the anti-everything. Like we kind of had 9/11 happened and suddenly everyone started moving. Like, we had... And we started blaming everybody. Like there's a real attack on America happened around 9/11, and there was people started moving all around the world. Like, and I think what she said something very profound. She said, from 9/11 to now, we've got to a point where everyone said, enough of people moving. We've had enough of everyone moving. Stop. Like you think about all of the immigration problems we've had in Australia and here, people are saying we've had enough of all the people moving. All the immigration, we've had enough. And I thought it was a really interesting thing. We're seeing a lot of that here, whether you're talking about non-domicile CDLs or immigration in general, the anti-this, the anti-that. A lot of people are saying enough. Let's take stock of what we're doing here, because immigration for immigration's sake doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Because
that means you lose your identity.
Yeah, and we moved here to assimilate.
Right.
That's why we became American
That was the
citizens.
point I was coming to.
Right.
You normally, the first generation, say, made some sacrifices and worked to bring value to give future generations the opportunities.
Yeah. We became, a lot of folks that moved from Australia came here, but they still lived in Australian lifestyles through Australian media. And we said, no. We became baseball coaches. We completely assimilated into the American way of life. Whereas other people that we were friends with at school didn't. Like they'd never assimilated into the American way of life. And I thought, that's not right. Like, that's not why you should be here. If you're going to live here, you've got to be part of the fabric of society and make a contribution. And that's where I think a lot of folks get it wrong. And that's where I think people start to get the division starts.